organisatie, internationaal netwerk of Iranian Kurdistan Human Rights, iedereen hartelijk welkom. In het begin zullen we gaan staan om 1 minuut stilte te acht te nemen. Daarna geschiedenis van alle slachtoffers. Deze van de laatste 4 decennia in Kurdistan van Iran, zoals opdracht van jihad door Khomeini, bombarderen van verschillende steden, gifgasaanval op steden zoals Sardar, Nusha en Zarda en provincie door van Kermanshah, de gedwongen emigratie van Kurden, gedwongen assimilatie, massa-executie en nog veel andere verschillende soorten misdaden die alleen in gedachten zijn gebleven, maar nooit door betrokkenen internationale organisaties bevestigd of gearchiveerd zijn. Hoewel voor het breken van vrijheid, vrede en democratie de Kurden in Iran niet gestopt zijn met strijden, maar desondanks nog steeds dagelijks zien we en horen we van onderdrukkingen en gewelddadigheden. Maar daartegenover staat dat de Kurden horen en merken er in praktijk niets van organisaties en overheden die al jaren ervaring met democratie hebben om hun invloed daar uit te oefenen. Ik hoop dat deze conferentie in staat is om de Kurden van Iran in toekomst meer aandacht te krijgen zodat hun situatie verandert. Bedankt.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear guests, first of all, thank you for joining us here today in The Hague, in the City of Peace. I'm pleased to see that so many of you could make it. My name is Johanna, and I'm from the Unrepresented Nations and Peoples Organization, UNPO. We're an international, democratic, and non-violent membership organization, founded here in The Hague in 1991. We represent minorities, indigenous peoples, and unrecognized or occupied territories worldwide who have joined together to find non-violent resolutions to conflicts that affect them. Since we will have the opportunity to listen to 4 expert speakers here today, I will keep my introductory remarks very short and just say a few words about the context around which we have gathered here. So the situation for the Iranian Kurds has deteriorated consistently since the Islamic Revolution of 1979, and the current situation marks an all-time low. In order to shed light on the difficulties faced by Kurds living in Iran and explore ways forward to tackle the institutional discrimination against them, UNPO, together with the International Network for Iranian Kurdistan Human Rights, decided to convene today's conference, Justice for Iran's Kurds. But what does justice mean in this context? During his election campaign, President Hassan Rouhani notably said, "Justice means that anyone who wants to speak in a society should be able to come out, speak their mind, criticize and critique without hesitation and stammering." Well, still today, serious human rights violations continue, most unabated, including a shockingly sharp rise in execution and the curtailing of press freedoms. Amongst those targeted are political activists, human rights defenders, lawyers, journalists, filmmakers, bloggers, members of religious and ethnic minorities, most notably Kurds, Ahwati Arabs, and Balochi. So in fact, Iran remains the 2nd biggest executor in the world after China, and has the highest number of executions per capita in the world. The Iranian authorities have officially acknowledged that so far this year, 236 executions have been carried out, including 23 in September alone. However, the actual number is believed to be much higher. So in other words, despite basing his election campaign on a human rights message, Rouhani's actions have been limited and failed to alter the disappointing status quo. One example is that the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in Iran, Ahmed Shahid, has still not been allowed to enter the country. And the international community continues to be more concerned with the ongoing nuclear talks, the November 24th deadline of which is rapidly approaching, than with the human rights situation in the country. And as former UN Human Rights Chief Navid Pillay noted in July this year, these talks, aimed at finding an agreement on Iran's contested nuclear program, should include human rights concerns. So at least this would prevent Iran from completely avoiding the issue in its international engagement. And at the same time, unfortunately, the current crisis in Iraq and Syria and the horrendous human rights violations committed by the so-called Islamic State has turned attention away from what is going on inside Iran. And on this note, I will give the floor to my colleague Jonathan Liss, who will be moderating today's discussion, and invite the first panelist to the podium.
Crimes perpetrated by the Iranian state since 1979. So, on that slightly sober note, I think we should move on to the first panel, which is about Iran's forgotten scandal. And to introduce that, I hope we'll have the second speaker as well. But the first one is Martin van Raunessen. I hope I pronounced that correct.
More or less.
Who is a professor of the comparative study of contemporary Muslim societies at the University of Utrecht. His published work is informed by strong interest in history and politics. He's carried out field work among the Kurds of Iran, Iraq, Turkey and Syria. He joined Utrecht's Faculty of Arts as assistant professor of Turkish and Kurdish studies, and has since shifted his emphasis to Islamic studies. He was involved in the establishment of the International Institute for the Study of Islam in the Modern World, and is a member of various scientific committees in Europe. So without further ado, I invite Professor to discuss from Johanna to Rouhani, 35 years in Iranian Kurdistan.
Thank you. I have, in the past 30, 40 years, very often given a talk about the Kurds and Kurdistan. And usually at the end of the talk, someone would stand up and say, well, you've spoken of the Kurds of Turkey, the Kurds of Iraq, even the Kurds of Syria, but why don't you talk about Eastern Kurdistan? Why don't you talk about the Kurds of Iran? And my answer would usually be, well, I would like to know more about the Kurds of Iran, but it is very, very difficult to get reliable information on what's happening in Iran. There is silence. It is, from the outside, as if nothing is happening in Iran. It's very difficult to get news out. Even when people travel, when people who live in Iran, in Kurdistan or in Tehran, they come to Europe, they are afraid to talk. There is a fear that has resulted in a silence, and the fact that we have little bits of information, but not an overall picture of the situation. Again, when I was asked to give a talk here on the Kurds of Iran, my first response was, yeah, what can I say? I know nothing about the Kurds of Iran. So I apologize that the few things that I'm going to say may be well known to everybody here, and see so many Kurdish faces that I'm afraid we will not be able to say anything really new, but perhaps I may be able to give you a general frame. So I would like to start with a map. Iranian Kurdistan is a part of Kurdistan, and it is connected. It has a long frontier with the Turkish and the Iraqi parts of Kurdistan. You cannot understand the history of Iran's Kurds if you don't also know the history of the Kurds in the Ottoman Empire and its successor states. The border separating Iran from Turkey and Iraq is a very old border. It's much older than the borders between Turkey and Iraq and Syria. Those are new. They were made by the French and the British after the First World War. But this is an old border. And it has separated the Kurds of Iran considerably from the other Kurds. And the Kurds of Iran are more oriented, have long been much more oriented towards Iran than towards the West. But in history, there has always been movement across. From the first uprising with a somewhat national character, the Simcoes uprising, we see that people from as far as Syria and Turkey traveled all the way overland to join because they felt they sought asylum there. And they felt that simply because uprising is an uprising of Kurds, of their own people. You find Kurds of Iran taking part in political events, political uprisings, taking place in Iraq in the 20th century. There have been many waves of refugees. Iraqi Kurds have fled to Iran. Iranian Kurds have fled to Iraq and to Turkey. Turkish Kurds, after the coup d'etat in 1980, massively political leaders of Kurdish movements in Turkey massively fled to Iran, which at that time, 1980, after the Iranian Revolution, was still largely controlled by the Kurds themselves. So there are Turkish Kurds who, for a while, were Peshmergas in Iran, then traveled. So the history of Iranian Kurdistan is connected with these other histories. Central governments of Iran and Iraq and Turkey have very often had relations with insurgent movements in one of the neighboring countries and supported them against the regime they didn't like. When the Shah of Iran did not like the Ba'ath regime, he supported Barzani's uprising. Many Kurdish political leaders in the 1970s could find a refuge in Saddam Hussein's Iraq because Saddam Hussein wanted to keep them in the fridge in order to use them at one opportune moment against his enemy, the Shah. Turkey has done the same. States have attempted to play on each other's Kurds. This is another way in which the histories of the Kurds of these different parts are connected. Similarly, the majority peoples, I mean the Kurds of Iran in the 1960s and 70s, when political action was oppressed, there was very little political action in Iran itself, but the Democratic Party of Kurdistan organized humanitarian support for their neighbors in Iraq. So there was an involvement of individuals, of civilians, also in the struggle of the Kurds in the neighboring countries. So there has been, I mean, it's part of Kurdistan. At the same time, it is very much part of Iran, and it's part of a very complex pattern of many different peoples living in Iran. The Kurds are, well, there's always disagreement about numbers, but very roughly an estimate about 10% of the population, perhaps a bit more, of Iran are Kurds, which means that there must be around 8 million, at least, Kurds in Iran. The Kurds are, in Iran, the largest of the Sunni peoples. We know that the majority of Iran, the regime of Iran, is a Shi'i Islamic regime. The Kurds and the Baluch and the Turkoman. The Baluch you find here, the Turkoman you find there, are the main Sunni groups who suffer discrimination on the basis of their religious identity. The Kurds have always sought recognition for their national identity or ethnic identity. Well, in the view of the Islamic regime, ethnicity is not a legitimate category. They do not want to judge people by the language they speak. The only thing that is relevant for the regime is the religion. And the Kurds, having a religion that is not Shia but Sunni, which is considered hostile to Shiism, have suffered because they belong to this other religion. Before the Islamic Republic, well, let me go back to the 19th century and earlier. Then Iran was an empire in which many different peoples lived with relatively little discrimination. There was an integration of all the different peoples through the elite. Elite families, tribal chieftains or emirs, families from the different ethnic and national groups of Iran were taken to the capital and stayed around the Shah and as hostages to make sure that their population was stayed in line. But there was no ethnic discrimination in those days. This is different in the time of modernity. We have had two modernizing regimes. The Pahlavi regime, which started with Reza Khan and later his son Mohammad Reza. The Pahlavi regime wanted to modernize the state, making a homogeneous nation state in which every citizen would be part of the same nation, and the nation was defined as an Iranian, a Persian nation. More or less like Turkey tried to do. Turkey tried to turn everyone into a Turk. And in Turkey, the Kurds had to say that they were Turks, and there was an invention of history according to which the Kurds had also come as nomads from Central Asia. And only because they had passed through Iran, they had lost their language and spoke a strange combination of dialects of Turkish influenced by Persian. The Kurds of Turkey have never really been fooled. They've never believed that they were really Turks. But in Iran it's a bit different. These Kurdish and Persian are closely related languages. And in fact, if you look at this boundary here, it looks very clear, but it is not so at all, because it is very hard to say where Kurdish ends and another language begins. Kurdish shades gradually into a number of Laki and Lor dialects, and those shade gradually into Persian dialects. There is no clear boundary. So, for the Iranian regime, which tried to integrate all its peoples on the basis of a common Iranian identity, it was perhaps a little bit easier, and many Kurds could be persuaded that they were closely related to the other Persians. The Islamic Republic is also a modernizing regime. And we may think that they're in many respects old-fashioned and backward, but it's a modernizing regime. They want to create a new identity, but their new identity is based on religion. It has had the effect of the Kurds being more discriminated, more set apart, at least the Sunni Kurds, than they were under the Pahlavi regime. It has also had the effect that the Sunni religion became perhaps more important to the Kurds than it had been before. Because as Sunni, it was part of their identity, it was an oppressed identity, and it became one factor on which Kurds could be mobilized. Now, I called the Kurds the largest Sunni ethnic group in Turkey, but I was in fact misstating the case, because many Kurds are not Sunni but Shi'i. The whole region here is Shi'i. Now, in the history of Kurdish nationalism, the Shi'i Kurds come very, very late. Most of the time they were not involved. They felt they identified themselves much more closely with the Persian Shi'i majority than with the Kurdish nation. It is only in the past decades that we see that those Shi'is have also come to consider themselves primarily as Kurds and secondarily as Shi'is. There is another interesting group of Kurds living far away from Kurdistan, in Khorasan. They were brought over there more than 400 years ago, but they have maintained their language, although most of them have become Shi'i. In the 1970s, when I visited those groups, they were very much aware that they were speaking Kurdish, but there was no identification with the Kurdish nation. They were interested in where they came from, which was somewhere in Turkey, close to Dersim, but they did not feel closely connected to the Kurdish political movement. Now, in the course of the past decades, this has changed. Both the Shi'is of Kermanshah and the Shi'is of Khorasan have come to consider themselves much more as Kurds, and there are individuals at least who publicly support the Kurdish struggle. This is perhaps also because there has been a lot of migration, urbanization. Kurds from all these different provinces have, in order to find work or education, have traveled to the major cities. Tehran and the other big cities now have huge Kurdish populations, where Kurds from different regions interact, which strengthens perhaps a more wide Kurdish identity. the course of the 20th century, the Kurds, who were in the early 20th century still a very diverse group, among which there was not very much internal solidarity, have gradually grown to be a more integrated ethnic group or nation, people. There's still at least 4 different cultural regions, and they have different histories, and they're associated with different stages in the Kurdish national struggle. In the north, we have, along the Turkish border, a population which is very tribal. Most of them belong to very large and powerful tribes, and they speak the northern Kurdish or Kurmanji dialect. And it was this region that was the center of the first uprising that I earlier mentioned, Simcoe's tribal uprising after the First World War. A part of that region started governing itself. They simply did not listen to the government, and they expelled government representatives, and it looks like an independence movement. Further to the south, where people speak here, this is Mahabad, Sanandaj, Mukriani, and other southern dialects. It's a more urbanized region. You have tribes, but you have also a large urban population, and it is in this region where the first bourgeois type political awareness and political movements emerged. There are tribal and feudal relations in that area, and you see in the time of the second Shah, Mohammad Reza, who exiled many of the big tribal chieftains to other parts of the country and carried out a land reform. You find after the Iranian Revolution that some of these tribal chieftains tried to come back and bring their land under control again. So that after the Iranian Revolution, you see struggles between old land-owning forces who try to regain control of the land, and peasant movements, some of which are organized by student organizers. Mahabad was the center of the first Kurdish republic that ever existed after the Second World War. And the Republic of Mahabad, which lasted less than a year, 1946, became of great symbolic value, not only for the Iranian Kurds, but for all the Kurds of Turkey, Iraq, and Syria. For the first time, Kurds had proven that they could have a state. In fact, many Kurds from Turkey and Iraq traveled to that state. Mullah Mustafa Barzani, the famous Mullah Mustafa Barzani, and his tribesmen became part of the army of that state for a while. There were lots of conflicts that emerged between them, but there were military officers from Iraq, from the Iraqi army, Kurdish military officers from the Iraqi army, who joined the state in Mahabad. So it was not just a local state, it was a state that appealed to people from a wide region. Although the scope of the state, the geographical area it controlled, was relatively limited. It was very, very important. It's the place where the Democratic Party of Kurdistan is born, is established for the first time, and from there it traces its own history and its own sense of identity. Further to the south, you have the city of Sanandaj, which used to be the capital of a Kurdish princedom, emirate, Ardalan. Its culture is more strongly Persianized, more influenced by Persian court culture than that of the other parts of Kurdistan. It was at the same time a center of Orthodox religious learning. Many very learned ulama in Sanandaj and in the mountains behind it in Hauraman. And we find that Sanandaj becomes a very important center of activism at the time of the Iranian Revolution. So it becomes politically active much later than the north. It is also interesting that in the Sanandaj area, in Mariban, close to the Iranian border, we see the first peasant rebellion, well not the first, but important peasant rebellions. So the movement in the Sanandaj region is more based on peasant mobilization and much less on, like it was in Mahabad, on an urban middle. Is still under the control of the various political parties and movements of Iranian Kurds. But then they were pushed back across the border. This is at the time when, at the same time, the Iran-Iraq war has started. 1980, Saddam Hussein invades first in the south, Iran, and later also in parts of Kurdistan. And the struggle of the Iranian armed forces against the Kurds and the struggle against Iraq coordinated. The Kurds are pushed back across the border. Many Kurdish leaders are killed or have to flee abroad. And we find that those who were politically educated, those who had run the local administrations, all have to disappear. So henceforth they live either in Iraq or later Sweden, Germany, Holland. Since then, silence again has descended upon Kurdistan, and again it's only from time to time that we hear some news. Let me briefly contrast the difficulties the Kurds in Iraq are facing with those in Turkey and in Iraq. We have very different regimes. In many respects, Turkey has had the most oppressive regime, especially in the high period of Kemalism. Turkey was determined to become a very modern state. It allowed only one identity, Turkish identity, and all others had to be assimilated, and assimilation had to be done by force. Language was not allowed. Culture had to be destroyed. People were massively moved from one place to the other. And the policy ended in a genocide of one region, Dersim, which the state considered as beyond repair. They killed 20% of the population and deported the rest. And again in the 1990s, when the PKK movement was gaining support in the countryside, the response of the central state had been to, well, as Mao Zedong says, a guerrilla has to be like a fish in the pond, and the pond is the people. The Turks understood that, so they wanted to divide up the pond by removing all the people. Huge areas were completely depopulated, all villages destroyed, in order to deny the guerrillas support from the population. So that is Turkey. Trying to prevent or undermine the Kurdish identity movement by destroying the physical infrastructure. Something very similar we have seen in Iraq. Iraq, on the one hand, recognized, unlike all these other countries, it recognized Kurdish cultural rights. You could have Kurdish education. There could be Kurdish publications in Iraq. And after 1970, there was even autonomy. Iraq is the only country that has ever given the Kurds autonomy. But it is precisely in this autonomous region that Iraq has carried out a genocide in order to destroy, again, support for the Kurdish movement. People were massively killed with chemical arms. Villages, 80% of the villages was razed to the ground and still has not been restored. I mean, traditional Kurdish culture has been completely destroyed. Now, compared to this, I've always said, Iran is a relatively benign country. Its policies have not involved the massive destruction of the physical infrastructure of a people, as Turkey and Iraq has done. Iran has had this policy of targeted assassination. A movement is led by an elite, and Iran has had a policy of destroying the elite, not the infrastructure. So leaders were assassinated, most famously Hassanlu in 1989 and 2 years later Sharif County. In the 1990s, when many Kurdish leaders were living in Iraqi Kurdistan. Hundreds, 200 or 300 were assassinated by assassination teams sent from Iran. Iran has assassinated people all over the planet. They target people, identify them, find them and kill them. It's a very different policy. It is a very effective policy because it has resulted in this silence about history. People who could speak are either killed or otherwise silenced. When I meet people who have come from Iran, it is very difficult to understand anything political from them. They will speak about Kurdish culture, and we understand that Kurdish culture is flourishing, there are Kurdish cultural publications and so on, but anything political, silence and fear. So Iran has effectively created an atmosphere of fear that is worse than what I have found in Turkey or in Iraq. In spite of all this, we have political movements. They are perhaps not very visible on the ground in Iranian Kurdistan. We have in the first place the old classical national movements that are secular. The Democratic Party of Kurdistan, which finds its roots in the Republic of Mahabad, and which was a government for a while in the 1980s. Komala, and both have had their splits and reconciliations and so on. They are the classical movements that have still among the older population, traditional sympathizers. They may have cells on the ground, I do not know it, perhaps we hear something about that later today. But what I understand from younger people is that among the young people, these movements do not really have the massive support, the potential to mobilize. There is another type of movements that people rarely speak about, that I think is quite important. They became more important after the Iranian Revolution. They were Sunni Islamic movements. In Mahabad, we found the Imam, the Friday Imam of Mahabad, Ezzedin Hosseini, suddenly becoming a political leader embraced by the left. Not so much by the Democratic Party, but leftists supported him. He had a brother in Baneh, Jalaluddin, who established his own Islamic political movement. There was a Naqshbandi Sheikh, Sheikh Osman, in Hauraman, who had been close to the Shah, who also established a Sufi army, Spy-Rizgari, against the Iranian Revolution. And I think most significant, there is a movement of modernist Sunni Muslims, led by a university-educated man, Ahmad Mufti Zawdi, called Maktab Quran, the School of the Quran, which until today has really deep roots in the Sanandaj, Sapres area, as far as I know, as far as I understand. Something entirely new that I would have found unimaginable in the past is that among the Sunnis there's now also a Salafi movement. Salafi, like Wahhabi, Saudis, right? We know, of course, that the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria has among its earliest members people from the Iraqi part of Hauraman. So there were Salafis at that side of the border. Now there appear to be Salafis on the Iranian side of the border as well. And they appear to be, because there is no organized political alternative, they appear to be increasingly influential among about segments of the population. And finally, there is a new type of political party. We hear about it for the first time in 2004. They claim to have come out of a student movement that was demonstrating for human rights. But in its present form, the PEJAK, the Party of Johanna Kurdistan, is closely affiliated with the PKK. And I mean, the news items speaking about violent incidents in Iranian Kurdistan usually involve PJK. KDP and Komala have formally renounced all the armed struggle, for the time being, I suppose. PJK has, from time to time, like the PKK does, announced a ceasefire, but they have never said we will not continue the struggle. They have been involved in armed events from all the way from Baku in the north to Kermanshah and everywhere in between. So they appear to be able to find support in the different cultural regions that in all 4 of these regions in which I have divided Kurdistan, which is perhaps to be ascribed to a success of organizing of this party. Perhaps it is also a symptom of a changing awareness among the Kurds, where the Kurds have, because of cultural oppression under this regime, become gradually more aware of their common Kurdish identity. Like you find among Kurds living in Tehran also, there's no relation with any political movements. They're afraid to talk about politics. But, I mean, they're very eager to show that they're not Persian, they're not Azeri, they're Kurds, and they're very proud of being Kurds. So this pride in being a distinct people, and I think the distinctness of the Kurds, and perhaps the fact that the integration into a single group is perhaps being strengthened in the last decades, and that is perhaps one of the few positive and hopeful developments that I can mention. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. I still don't think this microphone is working, but I think you can all hear me anyway. Thank you very much, Professor Van Rolness and teaching us for that extremely interesting overview of Iranian Kurdish history, and also Kurdish history which transcends borders, which is obviously a very interesting element in when we're looking at Kurdish minorities, how it's not limited to one nation state, and there are transnational issues for looking at solutions to these problems. It's also interesting that you mentioned the Azerbaijani Turks, because they're also a member of the UNPO, and we deal with advocacy for them. And there was a delegation from that community in Brussels a few months ago, and in fact also last week they were looking to address major human rights violations by the Iranian government against them. So that's also an area which can be looked at. It's not, they certainly don't feel like they're in a privileged position under the current Iranian regime. So now we turn to the second and final speaker in our first panel, who is Lokman, maybe, that's the first name. Who's a representative of Iranian Kurdistan to UNPO. He was born in Divandere, in Iranian Kurdistan.
Left Iranian Kurdistan, Qazi Muhammad, the president of the republic, was hanged and so on. They withdrew into Iraqi Kurdistan, but later on, in the middle and late 50s, hundreds of PKK members were arrested. In 1967, 68, we had a armed uprising from the PKK. Peshmerga forces fought against the Shah. Later on in the Republic, just as the professor mentioned, a series of new political organizations were established, and there were coordination and cooperation between these organizations in trying to reach a peaceful solution to the Kurdish issue inside of Iran. But Ayatollah Khomeini, he came back in in February of '79. Already in August of '79, he, in effect, declared a holy war, or a jihad, against the Kurdish people, and a brutal war ensued against the Kurdish people, in which the different political parties, including Komala, PKK, and other organizations, were forced to struggle militarily against the regime. And that armed struggle continued until the late, or in the middle of the 1990s. 96, armed operations against Iranian forces ended. And it was much related to developed autonomy that Iraqi Kurds had gotten after the Gulf War, or when the no-fly zone established. So it was partly related to us preserving.
Thank you very much. I must say that my speech is going to be very brief. I'm not going to go into details about party politics or perhaps whether the Sunni Kurds or the Shia Kurds are the most populous one. I must thank the previous speakers for their very useful speeches. They made very good points. But let me begin by expressing my thanks to the UNPO and also the International Network of Iranian Kurdistan Human Rights for organizing this exceptional conference on Iranian Kurdistan. We hear a lot in today's media about Kurds and Kurdistan, arguably more than ever before. Kurdish Peshmerga have always been a great source of pride for the nation, serving as protectors of their people and land over years of oppression and brutality. However, the term has recently become familiar in the West and has come to represent the legitimate Kurdish freedom fighters on the forefront of war against terrorism. They have been recognized as the force helping to protect not just their own, but other threatened ethnic and religious groups and peoples. This struggle has by no means been easy. The war and suffering is ongoing, and Kurds continue to pay dearly. The Kurdish issue has long been one of the major unresolved political questions in the Middle East. However, of the 4 parts of Kurdistan spread across the heart of the region, Iranian Kurdistan is often overlooked. While Iran does not shy away from news headlines around the world, it is usually It is usually in regards to its nuclear program and its hostility with the West. Seldom does its appalling human rights record make news, much less the specific persecution of its Kurdish minority. With a population of roughly 10 million people spreading across at least 4 provinces in north and northwestern Iran, Iranian Kurds are still deprived of their basic human rights. They do not have the slightest resemblance of a self-rule. They are denied education in their mother tongue. Investment in development projects is very rare. Kurdish students are constantly and disproportionately rejected into higher education by the notorious selection process for INIKHR. They have been denied access to high positions in government for the last 3 decades of the Islamic regime. They are subject to the harshest violations of human rights and the most brutal state violence. Despite some initial optimism at his election as president, Hassan Rouhani has just proven to be a friendlier face of the same brutal regime. A report by the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the Islamic Republic of Iran last month confirms that the human rights situation in the country remains of concern. Various laws, policies, and institutional practices continue to undermine the conditions needed for the realization of the fundamental rights guaranteed by international and even national law. A United Nations Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights in the Islamic Republic of Iran, held last month, concluded that there are many concerns still facing ethnic and religious groups. Despite significant progress achieved in reducing extreme poverty, certain underdeveloped regions, including Kurdistan, continue to show high levels of poverty. Poor living conditions in regions traditionally inhabited by ethnic minorities, in some cases completely lacked basic services such as electricity, plumbing, sewage systems, public transport, medical facilities or schools. As well as this, ethnic minorities face severe restrictions in practice with regard to education in their mother tongue, including Azeri, Kurdish and Arabic, despite some laws protecting the limited use of non-Persian languages. Closures of publications and newspapers in minority languages also prevent those groups from their right to take part in cultural life. There are about 400 Kurdish political prisoners and prisoners of conscience in the prisons across Iran. 60 of them are on death row and 15 have been given life sentence. In the last 3 months alone, over 12 border traders, known as kolbars in Kurdi, have been shot and killed by the Iranian armed forces, and 23 have been injured. In his annual report about human rights in Iran, the Secretary General of the United Nations, Ban Ki-moon, stated that the Iranian president's consideration of human rights in Iran remains symbolic, with serious efforts for improvement yet to be seen. According to him, different ethnic and religious minorities continue to face persecution. Human rights activists in Iran claim that 40% of the country's political prisoners in Iran are Kurds. They also state that in the past 2 months, 140 people in Kurdish cities have been arrested, 111 of which were by security forces. Crucially, despite all this, the Kurdish movement in Iran has remained democratic, secular, and pluralist, and has not succumbed to extremism, fundamentalism, or terrorism and blind violence. In fact, the Kurdish movement has been a vital component of any democratic movement in the country and in the region. Kurds have been at the forefront of fighting democracy in Iran for the last 35 years. Kurds have a special place among Iran's other nationalities and can play an indispensable role in the struggle to achieve democratic rights. It is only natural that the Kurdish parties have been one of the founders of the Congress of Nationalities for a Federal Iran and a significant partner of this umbrella organization of Iran's nationalities. The international community should back Iranian Kurds in their fight for their legitimate rights. Kurds and the Kurdish political parties constitute a key component of any democratic movement in Iran and are a vital element for progress in the future. Kurdistan can be the gateway to political and democratic change in Iran. While the concerns of the international community regarding Iran's nuclear program are legitimate, it is vital that the discrimination and the widespread violations of human rights are not neglected. As an unrepresented people, the Kurds of Iran should be given a voice at congressional and parliamentary hearings all over the world. Kurds can significantly contribute to a new democratic, multicultural, federal and secular Iran, which is the only way forward for an Iran that is at peace with his own people as well as with the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you.